Gladstone Regional Council are committed to fostering a proud, involved and engaged community. The Gladstone Regional Council Community Investment Program provides financial support to local community initiatives, projects and events which promote community connections, regional enhancements, community celebrations and community education. For more information on the Community Investment Program, visit gladstone.qld.gov.au. Gladstone Regional Council. Connect, innovate, diversify.
Illegal dumping and littering is a concern across the Gladstone region, with over 100 and...
Good morning, the time being 9 a.m. I declare open the general meeting for the Gladstone Regional Council for the 16th of April 2021. All councillors present, so no apologies. Do we have any messages of condolence, councillors? No messages of condolence. I'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is prior notifications of conflicts of interest, and I believe we don't have any listed at the moment.
No, we haven't received any.
Councillors, would you like to raise any at the table now? If not, obviously remind you to raise any conflicts of interest during the meeting that you become aware of. The next item on the agenda is the Mayor's statement on current issues, and firstly and foremost I'd like to mention the opening of the Phillip Street Communities and Families Precinct on the weekend. I did all the thank yous on the weekend to everyone who's put so much effort into making this project come to life. Identified as the #1 social infrastructure priority project for the Gladstone region in the Social Infrastructure Strategic Plan, the SISP, and obviously first stage of that project is now being delivered. So thank you to everyone involved. I won't go through the list of thanks again, but just the key partners, obviously the Queensland Government, the Federal Government, Council, Salvation Army and GAPDL. But so many people put so much into that over so many years, and it's fantastic to see the precinct open. And obviously the next stage is already got a lot of interest, including those potentially building aged care and retirement villages on the site opposite on Dave Burns Drive. Just in getting into the festive season. We have the Calliope Carols on Friday the 26th of November coming up, the Mayor's Carols at the Gladstone Corporation Marina Estate on Friday the 3rd of December. That's followed the next day by the Ulysses Toy Run, and thank you to the Deputy Mayor who will be participating in the Ulysses Toy Run this year. I've participated many times over the years, but unfortunately this year I can't make it, so thank you, Khan. And then on the following day we have the Christmas Street Party in Bundoon Street. So everything's sort of happening. Christmas is just around the corner. We'll have the wishing tree and the Mayor's as well. So please support the Salvation Army and the local charities and get out and about and help those that are in need this Christmas, and there's plenty of opportunities for you to do that. Before I move on, I'd like to acknowledge former Councillor PJ Sabanian joining the gallery this morning. Thank you, PJ, for being here with us today. The next item on the agenda is the confirmation of the minutes, and G 2.1 is a confirmation of the general meeting minutes for the 2nd of November 2021. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Khan. Thank you, Councillor Goodluck, and seconded Councillor Cameron. No business arising. I put the motion. All in favour. That's carried. Councillors, we have a deputation this morning. G 3.1 is a deputation from Interport Global Consolidated Holdings, and I'll ask the Chairman, who are very well known to everyone in Gladstone Region, John Abbott, the Chairman of Interport Global Group, for his presentation. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mayor Burnett, and greetings, councillors and others who are in attendance today. It's my pleasure to talk to the council about this, and as much as anything else, this is an update on much you already know, so I'll race through that. But there are some issues at the end which I need to raise to council which you may be interested in, and which will assist in planning that you will need to do over the next few years, I'm sure. I'll introduce Interport Global briefly for those who weren't at the GEA conference. I did talk about this company at the time it was developed. It was because during the advocacy program that I did on behalf of CQ Rock, the Gladstone Regional Council supported, it became very evident we actually needed a proponent to actually drive this process forward. And if you look at the timeline of this thing, this project's been going on for 130 odd years. So things obviously don't happen very quickly. And the view that we formed is that to be successful, this project needed to be up and going by 2025. And given the history of Inland Rail as it exists at the moment, 2035, 2045 was probably more likely if we left it to the government and the processes which have led to the development to date. So we've formed a company, IPG, Interport Global, as a proponent company, and there'll be more to announce on that in the near future. We have now a 50% partner in that exercise, and once we get through a few gates which we need to do from an approvals process, we will announce more and indicate more the funding that we are seeking to gain. So really the only issue that we've got at the moment with Inland Rail and the port is we need Inland Rail for the port development to happen. It's a given, it's a precursor, it's a condition precedent for the development to happen. And really, when you look at the route that's laid out there, it's quite obvious why this is a superior option, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. And the real only issue that's outstanding, and one we have to have considerable discussion with the federal government on, is actually the route. The work that was done for the CQ Rock and the Regional Council and the ports was done on the basis of joining Inland Rail at Toowoomba and then through the Western Line up to Gladstone. Further analysis indicate that's probably not the best option. The best and easiest option is to come straight down from Miles to Goondiwindi. There are some challenges with that, none the least being crossing some floodplains and also some high quality farming land. There is an alternate route, which is one we are currently working on and doing some estimation on, but it seems like the preferred route is to come from Miles to Chinchilla, then south from Chinchilla to Inglewood and join into Inland Rail at Inglewood. One very significant advantage is it'll save about $300 million in doing so, and that's, if nothing else, is a good reason to consider that option. And You can see that route just shown there. We would suggest to the government, even though the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister has made the statement that the route is the route is the route, that if we build this line, there is an option for ARTC to reconsider what's known as the forestry route and avoid the issues with the Condamine floodplain. But the only reason I'm showing this is we don't give a damn where the line to Brisbane goes. It doesn't affect our business case at all, but it probably will affect theirs. So what we are talking about is a 2 million container, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent container port. And I show this one as a very good analogue of what it is we're proposing and talking about. This is the port of Trieste, which was established not that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, as a 2 million container a year port. And it has some enormous similarities to what we are proposing. About 85% of the freight which it is a 2 million container a year port. About 85% of the freight which goes into Trieste actually goes on rail now and covers Europe. It picks up freight that comes up the Suez Canal, comes straight to Trieste, and then goes by rail to predominantly the south and the western part of Europe. Coincidentally, the alternative of going to somewhere like Rotterdam is about the same distance as from Trieste to Rotterdam as it is from Gladstone to Melbourne. Interesting, but coincidental. But we actually believe there is the potential for this port of Gladstone to grow potentially even as large as 4 million containers a year. And really that's the strategic challenge that we're putting not only to the Ports Corporation but to Gladstone, the state and the federal government, because it is a game-changing project. And I had an email only last night from someone who is involved on the, was involved on the Channel Tunnel in the UK, and he equated this project to the change that happened to the logistic structure in the UK because of the Channel Tunnel, and that was a nice thing to hear. And the reason this is important is the whole basis of trade into Australia is changing. It is changing already, but the infrastructure in Australia isn't changing to reflect it. If you look at what's happening in Asia, sure, China is dominant, but you have a look at countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Myanmar, India and so on. They are all, Indonesia, they are all the fastest growing economies in the world, not China. And that's where things are changing. And you have, for example, the Pan-Asian Rail Network. I think the main and the final leg of that actually opens in December this year, which will significantly change what happens to freight out of Asia to the rest of the world, not just to Australia. And what we are proposing is an option that instead of running the milk run which currently exists, where freight goes in ships from Singapore or Shanghai or wherever and do a milk run. They go to Brisbane, they then go to Sydney, they then go to Melbourne. Half of those then go to Auckland and then back to wherever they came from. It's a model which, as we all know, is currently causing significant challenges on the waterfront and very steep price rises. The model we are talking about is a shuttle route, say from Gladstone to Singapore return, from Gladstone to Port Klang and return, from Gladstone to Shanghai and return. Dedicated ships offloading all of their freight and then reloading and heading back to where they came from. It's a different model, but it has very significant advantages. This is the summary bit, I might add. And this is the business case. And there are two parts of this slide and the next one, is that if you unload a container in Gladstone or load a container in Melbourne on the train to come to the Port of Gladstone or leave from the Port of Gladstone, 25 hours is the time frame to Melbourne, for example, from Gladstone by inland rail. The ship which sails past Gladstone won't even be at Brisbane in that time. And time is money, and that's really what the business case is here. We can have things to the western suburbs of Sydney, which is where the growth corridor is happening in Sydney, in about 24 hours, taking a turn just before Moree there. So that's the business case which we're relying on. And you'll have seen when the Deputy Prime Minister announced that the rail will come to Gladstone, or he proposes the rail to come to Gladstone, that the Port of Brisbane actually, response was a really very interesting one, and I'm not sure they actually realised what they said, as they said, why would ships stop at another port? And that's exactly the point we're making. They were obviously saying, why would the ships stop in Gladstone rather than coming to Brisbane? Our view is, why would they stop in Brisbane when they can unload everything in Gladstone and turn around and go back again? And the point to make is that everything, one of the truisms in road freight, remembering that rail transports, road delivers. The last mile of a container always happens on a truck, nearly always. If the distance that the container has to travel is, and it depends on which company you talk to, some say 300 kilometres, some say 500 kilometres. If it's in that distance, say let's say 500 kilometres, it is not worth putting a container onto a train and then taking it off, putting it on a truck to deliver. It's cheaper just to put it straight onto the truck and deliver it. So what happens is that when you analyse what's being proposed for the Port of Brisbane for a connection to inland rail, there is not one container that goes on, or it could potentially go onto the inland rail from the Port of Brisbane that could not go onto inland rail at Gladstone cheaper and quicker. Not one container. There is no way you can justify it, because if it goes to the Port of Brisbane, it will go on a truck. And if you use actually, and this is an academic exercise, if you actually use the 500 kilometre radius, we believe that if you offload a container in Gladstone and you're heading to the north side of Brisbane River, then you'll actually get it there quicker and cheaper from Gladstone than you will out of the Port of Brisbane. That's just as an aside. So that was by way of introduction, and this is now when I'm starting to talk about what it is we're proposing for Gladstone. We are proposing a two-stage development based on that 2 million and 4 million container diagram I showed earlier today. Our intention is that the first 2 million containers would happen at Port Central. And we are actually, we have no formal agreements with the council, with the Port Corporation, and we're talking those at the moment, but it is our proposal to place that at Barney Point, at Auckland Points 5 and 6. Not Auckland Point 4, which will remain a common user terminal, but Auckland Point 5 and 6. That is the proposal. Now, there are quite a few changes that need to happen to achieve that, but it is quite logistically possible, feasible, and quite economic development as well. Similarly, should we ever grow to beyond the 2 million containers, and certainly we hope we do, but it's not a certainty, of course, nothing is certain in this world, is that the second stage would not try to be done at Barney Point, at Auckland Point 5 and 6. It would be done up at Fisherman's Landing. And the concept we would have is the smaller ships would head up the channel to Fisherman's Landing. The larger ships, which need the larger draft, would still remain at Auckland Point 5 and 6. That's the concept that we're having. Now this is starting to put some figures to those concepts which I've just laid out there. The top part of this table reflects two extracts from several documents. The BITRE report, which you may have reported, the Bureau of Industry, Transport and Regional Economics, that was done, which predicted that container freight in Australia by 2050 would reach in the order of 20 million containers a year. And currently it's running at around 7 to 8, but that's the figure. Then you go and have a look at the annual reports and the strategic documents from ports of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, and you sort of get a picture of what they think will need to happen to achieve that sort of growth, and that's what that top table is there. Now the reality of it is the ports of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne are actually currently land constrained at the moment. You don't run out of water at a port, you run out of land, and it's predominantly due to the corridors, being able to get the containers in and out of the port to deliver that. Sydney, there are many who will say Sydney's at its capacity now. So the concept to treble the capacity out of Port Botany is, many say, is a pipe dream. Similarly with Melbourne, there is no way Melbourne can achieve that sort of tonnage unless they develop at Geelong. And as an aside, Geelong's up for sale if you want to buy it. So they're the constraints that we believe that we are addressing from the port side of things. So we've taken a different picture of sort of saying, well, what happens if we actually do transfer some of that freight in and out to Gladstone? And we've been quite conservative in these, and got a mind of its own. And what we're saying is that's what it would look like. Now, the view that we have said to the politicians and the federal bureaucrats in particular is that Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne will still grow. But what Gladstone offers is an opportunity to limit that growth and manage the growth and significantly reduce the capital cost of infrastructure in those towns to a very low cost option here in Gladstone. And to give you an example, is you may have read in the media about the link from Ipswich to the Port of Brisbane, 50-kilometre tunnel, which is going to cost something in the order of $20 billion. The whole project we're talking about, port and rail, for Interport Global is under $4 billion. So that's the sort of difference in capital cost saving that's available there. So that is an alternate view of freight that we believe is quite conservative and quite achievable, and we believe will be a game changer for freight in this country. Now, what does that look like over time? We believe that growth to 4 million containers a year will happen by 2050. So there's quite a long lead time in this, 30 odd years. There's obviously some time to construct. We will be able to do some early stuff perhaps in 2024 before the inland rail connection is done, because our belief is that we should be able to get that done in 2025, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is where we come to the point that I need to engage with the council, and the purpose of this discussion today is, if you look at Auckland Point 5 and 6 with that growth, where we go to 2 million containers a year at the port of at Auckland Point and to 4 million at Fisherman's Landing, it means, on the basis of an assumption that 10% of our freight goes straight onto truck to service the local area, generally speaking, it's 3 containers per truck on a B double, working 18 hours a day, so maybe not working midnight to 6, and 310 days a year, which means you're not working on Saturday. Assumptions you can vary to suit yourself, but that's the ones we've done in here, is that means there are 11 truck movements an hour, which would be coming along wherever the port access road ends up. All right. Now, obviously, some of those containers will be quite heavy, particularly the ones going out as opposed to the ones going in that'll be full of frozen beef or aluminium ingots and so on. So they'll be 28 odd tonnes gross each, so they won't be B doubles. To keep under the weight limit, they'll just be standard. So that number will grow or reduce depending on the weights and so on. But assuming they're all B doubles, there'll be 11 truck movements an hour. Given that some of them will be normal semis, that figure will actually go up. Won't go down unless, for whatever reason, at some stage in the future we get A doubles or A triples or something coming in. But at this stage, we're assuming B doubles. But this is the other one, is what the impact of rail will be. Same deal, 2 million tonnes at Auckland Point, 2 million containers at Auckland Point, 4 million will be split between there and Fisherman's Landing. Is by 2034 or thereabouts, we'll be talking somewhere in the range of 28 train movements a day. This is a day, the other one was per hour, right? This is a day. So a little bit more than once an hour. on the presumption we have the 80 wagon train going across, but I actually think we'll end up splitting it. It'll be 2 40 wagon trains, just for logistics out of the port. But 28 train movements a day. So 14 in, 14 out, roughly. Because of where it has to come through, and I'll show you a bit of a sketch in a minute, it will still be quite low shunting speeds as it picks up to go around up to Kalamunda. Bearing in mind this is a standard gauge rail, so there will actually be rail modifications as well. So the estimate crossing Auckland Street is the issue that we foresee, and the one the council needs to be aware of, is probably in the order of 8 to 10 minutes for an 80 wagon train to cross as it accelerates away to that area of the world. So roughly once an hour, Auckland Street potentially, and I'm talking about 2034, will be closed at that sort of frequency. So that, we believe, is something we need to talk to the council about, and obviously needs to be considered in their planning. Initially, obviously, it's a lot lower than that. Of course, it'll take time to ramp up.
Sorry, John, can I jump in? That would also mean Blaine Drive as well?
Yes, but it'll be shorter there because it'll be up to probably in the order of 40 to 50 kilometres an hour at that point of time, so it's probably more like 3 minutes.
Thanks.
So this is, and this is concept only, and is just to confirm that we're only in preliminary discussions with the port at the moment, is this area here will end up having 2 berths eventually. Highly likely it'll be a single berth initially and then grow. There'll be 2 dual grade lines at 800 metres each, which means 40 wagons on each line. So to get the 80 wagon train, you'll take 40 out, join up and then go, but probably more likely take 40 out to Kalamunda or somewhere and join the trains over there somewhere. That's more likely. The hazardous goods area would be at the furthest distance away from the town. Because we believe a very significant proportion of the freight out of here will be refrigerated freight. We've got the concept design has room for somewhere between 200 and 300 refrigerated containers located in that area. And you'll see up in this almost centre screen there is where the truck marshalling area would be for the proportion of the freight which will go out on trucks. I just need to say in the early days, when you're talking 2024 and so on, and that's part of the reason there's that blip in the at the start, is when you look at the if the hydrogen developments happen and you have the solar farms that go with it, there's something in the order of 200,000 containers of solar components which will need to come in sort of 2023, 2024. We've actually allowed for that, and that may alter our time sequence for delivery here. And you'll see the route that will come out across through the marshalling yards up to Auckland, crossing Auckland Street there. So how we plan for that is an issue that we obviously need to talk to council much further on. So that was all I was going to go through today. I'm happy to answer any and all questions you might have on the development.
Thanks, John. Councillors, I have been briefed on this a number of times, obviously with the port as well. So are you allowed to discuss much of your conversation with the port yet, or is that
No, we're covered under, I think at last count there are about 5 different NDA agreements. So there's some I can talk about, but much I can't.
Councillor Churchill has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Matt. Just a couple of comments and a couple of questions, John.
Yes,
as such, I think you're already preaching to the converted of the business case of coming to Gladstone. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And at the GEA industry conference, appropriately, I recognise that there's continual reports that are coming through to us. At the end of the day, doesn't really matter who builds it as long as it comes to Gladstone. I know from your perspective that your proposal is IPG, but in your presentation you mentioned Errol Compton as well, who's now I think just celebrated his 90th birthday.
Yep, a month ago. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So he continues to espouse the significance of the nation-building infrastructure. And that was part of our business case, is coming from Melbourne to Gladstone is about nation-building, but the project was always touted as Melbourne to Darwin.
Yes.
Originally, and when I see on your presentation on page 7, your routes coming down through from Asia by sea down to Gladstone. So, and I have had the opportunity, like many of us, to get a greater understanding of what IPG is espousing. Can I just ask the question in relation to the likelihood from a nation-building infrastructure that if we've now got them convinced, or with the public announcement, the $10 million for the feasibility study now to come to Gladstone.
Business case, not
Oh,
feasibility study.
Oh, right, okay. Well, the feasibility study effectively said that Gladstone is not viable, so, you know,
That's outrageous.
That's
not
outrageous.
correct.
It's
That's
an
not
oversight,
correct, Lenny.
and they didn't, and it was flawed in many parts. So I make that comment publicly. But coming back to the Melbourne to Darwin proposal, is that just give us an idea of, from your perspective, albeit IPG, if, for example, you got the federal government came along and started to then talk about Melbourne to Darwin, how does that affect your business case? And the other part of it is what can be done from your perspective to ensure that it strengthens your business case on that coming to Gladstone?
That's a very complex question, Councillor Churchill. We have looked at Darwin, and certainly Des Ewan has looked at, who's the principal of IPG, has looked at Darwin, but at this stage we are considering that as a potential stop-off point only at this point of time. We've also tried to see if Townsville makes sense for us as well, being aware that they've put container cranes in there. We can't make any sense of that, I might add, but we have tried that. It will still be cheaper for freight from Townsville, for example, to come to Gladstone than it will be to go out of the port of Townsville. That's just where we're sitting at the moment. There is nothing in our plans and our discussions to take inland rail from Gladstone to Darwin. Not something we've looked at, considered or otherwise. Certainly Everald is actively involved in what we're doing, and he and I talk regularly, and we actually use Everald to do some lobbying activities on our behalf, and I might add, unbelievably successfully, I might add. He's a fantastic fellow and one of our great advocates and a great resource for us to keep using for as long as he's able.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, you don't have to convince me on that. Everald's a long-time friend of mine. The other part of it is the business case. Gary Scanlon, who's here today, our economic development specialist, and I had the fortunate opportunity to represent the council in the region, as you would know, at the Inland Rail conference, be it down at Albury-Wodonga. And they kept talking about and you mentioned it again today, that time is money. And they kept talking about the 24-hour, 25-hour period. And we've done a joint report to this council. In your opinion, from the IPG business case at this stage, you made inference to it there earlier, and I make this comment relevant to my question, is that it was quite obvious that the business case of going from Toowoomba to Brisbane, that freight and passenger rail are not compatible. Freight and passenger rail will not be able to function and operate effectively and efficiently. So I'll come back, in making that statement, I'll come back to the question. The 24-hour, 25-hour period seems to be one of the stimulus for many of the international operators in the freight industry. So do you believe that appropriately Melbourne to Gladstone now strengthens our business case that we can still be within that 24, 25-hour period?
The short answer is yes, but the critical part actually isn't the 24 hours. Because whilst there is some freight that is time sensitive, by the nature of the current routes, if you think of a ship that comes from 10 days sailing to Brisbane, then you add the 10 odd days to do the milk run round to Melbourne, and then maybe go across to Auckland and then up to wherever it's going in China. You think of the full transit time. It's not just, and I think this is part of the problem of infrastructure planning in the country, is it's always just sort of looked at this little bit rather than the whole supply chain. And you hear a lot about supply chain at the moment, and it's that has to change. But if you think of someone in Brisbane who's trying to export something, it does the 10 days down to Melbourne, and it then does another 20 days back. If they're being paid FIS, free in store at the in place, is they're going to be waiting 1 or 2 months for their money. And if you can halve that to 1 month, you can do your math yourself on the cost of supporting business, the weighted average cost of capital and those sorts of things. You're talking a lot of money. So it's not just the logistic chain within Australia, it's the total logistics chain. So if someone can bring their product, let's say out of Melbourne, and to bring it to Gladstone and get it on in 1 day, and then on a ship which goes to Singapore in 10 days, that is a 10-day saving on his or her alternative at the time. And that's where the money comes from.
Okay.
That's where the business case comes from.
Okay, I understand.
But there are also all sorts of other challenges, like, and that's part of the reason you've got these container mountains happening in Brisbane, is, you can't, if you have to put empty containers, because the ship's going to Sydney, it's got full containers, you can't put full containers on empty containers. So you load the containers on the ship, they get to Sydney, they've got to take them all off again to get the good ones off. So it's the whole supply chain issue that has challenges, and that's what we're looking to change.
Terrific. Just my last one, if you don't mind. Probably to localise this a little bit now, is that having travelled the corridor and from the number of inland rail conferences, summits, call them what you like, over the many years as part of that advocacy, is that many of the councils, if not all of the councils along the corridor, have varying issues along the current corridor. It's being built right now. Yep. The workforce is down there. So my two connected questions appropriately is that there are those who are totally in favour of it along the corridor because of the jobs that it's created, but at the same time there are some councils along the corridor that are concerned about impact on their area, impact on the community, sound, noise, etc., etc. So you'd be aware of those, and hopefully that IPG is considering that. And the other part of it is that one of the continued advocacies is, if from an IPG perspective, do you have a local buy policy that will ensure that we can get many of our local businesses, if your proposal is to progress with success, what's your take on local buy policy and local support for local businesses?
We have made the statement publicly already that we will be seeking to maximise local involvement and local purchasing as much as possible. I have had discussions with folk, for example, about the construction of the types of wagons that we will need for this. And we have a couple of options. We have Rockhampton and Maryborough. So our definition of region might be a little bit greater than this council's version, but and obviously you have to look at how Bravius did their railway line, and all the concrete sleepers for that, for example, were made in Rockhampton. We would be seeking to do something similar. The real benefit for the region, whilst the logistics supply chain is a benefit for the whole country and the state, the benefit of the region is all the spin-off stuff that happens from it. The logistics services businesses that flow out of it, the repacking, reconsolidation and all those sorts of issues. That's where the real benefit will come from for the region.
Yeah, thanks, John. Best wishes.
Thanks, Councillor Churchill.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. Councillor Branthwaite, Goodluck and Muscat.
Thanks, Mayor Matt. This is excellent, John. It's and from years ago, after listening to Errol, it was always a pipe dream, but always quite real. My questions aren't quite as deep as Councillor Churchill's. The likes of, does Brisbane export coal from there?
It does.
Yes.
It has the capability to export about 10.5 million tonne a year. The currently doing it around 5 to 6 million tonne a year, and basically all of their growth was forecast to come out of New Auckland, which, as you know, hasn't. The New Hope colliery.
Right.
That hasn't happened. So that's had a very significant impact on obviously the business case for Inland Rail to Brisbane.
So at the moment, the focus is solely on the container freight coming back and forth. But this corridor would open that up to a coal wagon as well, would it
absolutely. And part of the rules in this country is when you build a piece of public infrastructure like we would be proposing here, it's open to all comers. Whilst our business focus is on the container freight, our estimate is in the early part of it, and obviously decline, one would expect that coal will decline. There will be some coal on it using the existing infrastructure of the port here. We also anticipate there'll be potentially up to 2 million tonne a year of agricultural freight, which will come.
That's what I was coming to. Mainly because you're talking a standard gauge and a narrow gauge. Well,
it'll be dual gauge. Yes.
Dual gauge. So the likes of I think the display you had up there before and what happens actually at the port with the loading and unloading and so the dual gauge, what's it? What just clarify? Is it you've got two sets of rail on the one track?
You have 3 rails on a sleeper.
Oh, okay, so there's an outside one.
Yeah.
So, and that would happen from what, Mara upwards or from?
Haven't decided yet, but the most likely thing, the standard gauge will come all the way, obviously, from the connection with Inland Rail all the way to the Port of Gladstone, but only to where our container facilities are. At any point, if we dual gauge it, we may dual gauge it from miles.
Yeah.
And that's probably we will dual gauge it from miles, because that will enable both agricultural and, if coal freight happens,
right,
from there. And that would then be able to use existing infrastructure here in the Port of Gladstone.
Yeah. All right.
And it's a very important question for us, because to dual gauge a line as opposed to building it just standard gauge or just narrow gauge is about 15% cost differential.
Oh, I've got no doubt. Yeah.
We'll only dual gauge to the point where we think it adds value to the project.
So we often see the likes of your transcontinental sort of rail with carrying containers as one on top of the other. Will this have the capability of that? Or would it just be because you won't have any electrification, obviously?
Well, the only difference between us and what, at this stage anyway, I should say, us and what ARTC are proposing, they're using double stack wagons.
Yeah.
It is our intention to use single stack wagons, and there are some good engineering reasons for that.
Right.
The main one being is if you're unconstrained by space, make the train longer rather than higher. And there are some good engineering reasons to do a centre of mass and all of those sorts of things while you do that.
Okay. Well, thanks, John. Excellent. It was really cool to see this progress.
Thanks.
It's Councillor Goodluck.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, John. This is really exciting stuff, and it's got the potential to transform and diversify our local economy, as well as obviously be a nation-building project. I just had one question. You mentioned time is money in the supply chain. My understanding, the difference between Auckland Point and getting up to Fisherman's Landing, where you said the 4 million TEU would be located, is up to 3 or 4 hours longer in the travel time. Does that obviously not impact the time is money business case for that portion?
If you look at the entire logistics change, it's a minor impact compared to others. The main reason, to be perfectly honest, if Fisherman's Landing was ready now and had the ability to take the bigger ships, our preference probably would be to go up there to start with. But the reality of it is if we go to the larger ships, it'll be quite some time before the draft capability exists up at Fisherman's Landing to take those bigger ships. So the intention is The Portona cranes that we put down at Auckland Point 5 will have their bigger machines to take the bigger ships. You have the deep draft just out in the channel, quite narrow, close there, so we can take those bigger ships.
And then the would it be from Fisherman's Landing then, would the idea be to then truck to the truck marshalling area, or would there be a rail link to Fisherman's Landing?
We'd put a rail link up there, and we have had discussions about what that looks like up through there, yes. Okay. It does present some interesting challenges how to then join onto the Mara line, but we actually have had a design done, because part of the challenge with the Mara line, the line between here and Billawheeler, there are some sections which are very tight radius and very steep, and we've come to the conclusion already that actually upgrading that line to the 1,000 metre radius and the 1 in 100 grade actually is unbelievably expensive. So we're actually proposing a new route which just east of Billawheeler to head up towards Delulu and then come down there, which will actually put us in the right place to come into Fisherman's Landing eventually as well, because we actually don't have ability to connect across there at the moment. So that's, we're doing those options at the moment. Similarly with the gazetted route down the Surat Basin through the area there that was done part of that development back in 2010. There's a section there that we're going to change the route just to maintain, because we want to get this thing up to 100 kilometres an hour and keep it there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Muscat.
Thank you. Thanks, John. I just wanted to ask you two questions. And before that, I think it's actually quite valuable that we have these also on a live stream, so a lot of people can get a bit more information about the project, which is, well, for some of us might be obvious, but it's not obvious for everyone. So there's two things I wanted to ask you. So you spoke about timing, cost savings, capacity of our port compared to other ports. It makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to, I guess, from the other side, what is that you're going against? What is your business case, this business case going against? Why is it not so obvious to others, and what are the things that other people are pushing for to not sort of have these, taken off? And then the other one, if you don't mind me asking, just so I'll leave it to you, it's and it's a bit related to what Councillor Churchill mentioned before, is in relation to social impacts, and specifically in Gladstone, and what you see happening if, say, this was to be happening, and then we have all this activity, which is wonderful, but there's obviously going to be some social impacts there. And also specifically, will there be anything that you see happening to the airport?
Well, okay. Let me start with the last one first. Actually, is we're not planning to put planes onto trains, but but the reality of it is when you look at logistics hubs globally, is that generally speaking there is an ability to take rail and sea and aircraft. And now the Gladstone Airport is obviously in the wrong place and the wrong design to play a part in that. But the Rockhampton Airport is only just up the road, and it has a very long runway and has the capability. It doesn't have the apron access requirements to do that, but I believe as part of the other initiatives that are happening up there, that will happen. And that's close enough to actually say good enough, if there is a global freight hub happens here. And I know in my time living in Rockhampton recently, is you see the big Antonovs land there, so it can take those big freight planes now. Coming back to the first question is, why isn't it obvious? If you go back to that very first slide, I showed that this has been on since 1898. When that particular politician said that the inland rail or the transcontinental railway to Gladstone will happen in the next few years. basically what happened then was exactly what happened in 2010, where this thing got hijacked on different political priorities and different political imperatives. The real challenge for, if you go back to 2010, is that those who chose the route did not consider at all the international freight growth, because the Bidri report that didn't come out to 2015. And as I said in my submission to the Senate hearing back in January of this year, is when that report came out in 2015, which was about the same time as the business case for Inland Rail happened, there should have been a total stop and rethink. That did not happen. They just charged on regardless, because the whole justification for Inland Rail was done on coal. 26% of the revenue for Inland Rail was coal, and domestic freight, capital to capital, Brisbane to Melbourne to Sydney. Right? That was how it was justified. Those two assumptions are flawed, absolutely flawed. So if you want to, my answer is that they went to the wrong place in that business case back in 2015. They made the wrong decision back in 2010 because they actually focused on the wrong thing. But what's actually happening at the moment is business is actually correcting it for them. To my knowledge, there are now 4 intermodal hubs being designed and purchased and built in various stages of development in Toowoomba, because the freight companies are realising that if they offload the domestic freight in Toowoomba, that they can actually pick up their container in Toowoomba and have it to their customer before the train even arrives at Acacia Ridge. And that's what's happening. And I'd make a prediction, and you can hold me to it if you like, but my prediction is that the Toowoomba to Brisbane link will never be built. That's my prediction.
It's a fantastic prediction.
The social impact question.
And the social impact question, I'm not sure we've done the work to determine that. But you have a look at the number of trucks, the number of trains, the logistics requirements to man and do this. I mean, it'll be a growth project for the region with a lot of spin-offs. And you know, if without answering any other question is, you know, given the potential changes in this region, this will just be one of those growth projects for the region that you all actually have to work out how best to manage. One of the challenges we'll actually have, and it's actually a nationwide one at the moment, is skilled people to build railway lines, but then you actually got the challenge of skilled people to run trains. So we have to work out how to do the training and development, all those sorts of things from there. How do we participate in the green environment and the green engine, green things? There are actually locomotives now running on fuel cells in the US, the UK at the moment. So we'll watch that development with great interest.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
John, yesterday I wrote to the Mayor of Banana Shire, Western Downs, Toowoomba and Goondiwindi, and invited them to partner with Gladstone Regional Council for a rolling forum we plan to host next year in April, May, depending on timing and things like that. But that's sort of about the time we're looking at hosting that forum. And basically it would follow the rail, the route along the way. So we would start in Gladstone, say on the Monday afternoon, Monday evening, do port tours, state development area tours. That'll be like a conference welcoming and a keynote speaker that night. Then the next day would be Gladstone to Billawheeler, so we'd leave on the Tuesday morning about 7:30. There'd be side tours, commentary along the way. Obviously, we're thinking about chartering a couple of buses, 90 to 100 delegates to be involved, and obviously people like yourself might want to be involved in that. Obviously, the businesses along the way, but also those interested investors and things. Just talking agribusiness, renewable energy, and I'm glad that you said 2 million tonne of the freight is going to be agricultural freight, which is fantastic. Then that's an opportunity for the Banana Shire Council to showcase their region. They would probably host the lunch. We've just written to them yesterday, so the mayors probably haven't got to reading it yet. But Billawheeler to Miles on the Tuesday afternoon, get there about 5 o'clock, site tours, commentary again on the way, resource development, agriculture, and water, and obviously the Western Downs then, Mayor Paul McVeigh would be his opportunity to showcase his region. And then it'll be either Miles to Toowoomba or Goondiwindi. Now we could do both, or either, or like you said, there's a few different route options after Miles. So that would be on the Wednesday, and there will be site tours again, commentary, and then an opportunity for the host council, whether it is either or both, and then we basically send everyone back to the Brisbane airport or to Brisbane City from there. So that's sort of about the same time. I know Councillor Churchill asked for a forum to be hosted a number of years ago, and we've been participating in the Inland Rail forums, but I think it's best that we take the lead on this and work with our neighbouring councils rather than wait for other states to host forums and then just participate. Then we take the lead, and I think we can develop plenty of opportunity for our regional Queensland along the way. So any further questions, councillors? Thank you,
Just
Councillor
one,
Hanson. Yep.
Yes,
John, through you, Mr Mayor.
Yep.
You mentioned the airport and its incapacity, as far as you're concerned, to take that. It would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you to consider the area they've got out there. It's close to rail, close to intermodal at that area out there as well in your plans. You're probably not at the moment, because the way you said you talked about Rockhampton, but in the interim, I believe the airport could handle the logistics of that. So I just wanted to know whether you consider that.
Well, it's certainly not. It's not an issue which we're actively pursuing at the moment, other than the fact that we have considered it as part of an overall freight picture. I know in another role, when we've been talking with the Rockhampton and Livingston councils about the defence capabilities, Gladstone's got the port, Rocky's got the airport, Livingston's got the training area. So, the three areas really need to work together in a lot of things. That's part of the reason I spoke with Everil Compton actually at the Cap Enterprise luncheon a few weeks ago on the same topic, is that there are many opportunities that could exist in Livingston and Rockhampton that can piggyback on the back of here.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Grady.
So, thank you. Thanks, John. That was great. Recently, some of us have been up to the LGAQ conference, and we had a chat to some of the mayors, and they're just so supportive of the projects. It was fantastic, and they were really keen to do something. So, thanks for writing a letter to Mr Mayor.
Mayors from those councils I mentioned before seem very keen. Obviously, the Gundawindi Toowoomba issue might be something for those to sort themselves out, but it will come from Miles into Gladstone, and definitely the Mayor of Banana and Western Downs are very supportive. And also, we met other people at the LGAQ conference from parts of Brisbane and Logan that are very opposed to it going into their city. Yeah. Oh, they'll be coming. I have no doubt. There'll be councillors and representatives from Logan City Council attending to encourage the alignment to come through to Gladstone. Councillor Churchill, do you have a further question? Or?
No, not a question. I was just wanting to move the officer's recommendation that the deputation from Interport Global Consolidated Holdings be received. But in moving the motion, I'm pleased to hear that you've written to all the local governments from our motion that was a motion of this council. And I realise from a number of years ago, and perhaps that might be something we might talk about in a couple of weeks' time when we have a joint report coming through to council from the GEA industry conference in a few weeks' time. And my other point is that if I could just emphasise one particular point, history will show, and you indicated, John, that it was hijacked over a period of time. And yes, state and federal governments had the capacity to deliver these types of nation-building infrastructure, but it's been local government right along that corridor that have never relented in their advocacy for the project to happen. And I think that's absolutely imperative. What Mayor Matt's now done is to effectively consolidate the strength of that advocacy of all the local governments along the corridor. And if those from Brisbane who are opposed to it want to play an active part, well, that'll be great if they can as well.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to second that motion, but could you repeat it again, please?
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Churchill.
Deputation from the Interport Global Consolidated Holdings be received.
And seconded by Councillor Hanson.
I'll second that.
I'll put the motion all in favour. Thank you. And thank you, John. That's fantastic. I hope people watching online got to hear all that. All right, councillors, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is our officers' reports. And the first officers' report is G4.1. It's a tender 255-21 waste recyclables roadside collection service. And I'll hand over to the General Manager of Operations, John Tumbers. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good morning, councillors. This report seeks resolution to enter into contract with JJ Richards and Sons Proprietary Limited for waste and recyclable roadside collection services. Essentially, it's maintaining the roadside collection service as it currently provided from October 2022 to January 2026, a 3-year and 4-month plus 1-year extension option. We went to market and received 2 conforming submissions. JJ Richards and Sons scored the highest overall in evaluation and presents the best value for council. The service is within approved budgets, around about 3.2 million per annum. Open for questions.
And less than we're currently paying, is that right?
That's correct.
Well, how good is that? Well done, John. Well done, team. Thank you, Lisa. That was a very big shock to me when I saw that. I expected them to increase, and they haven't. So it also gives us an opportunity. It's only a 3-year, is it, John? Yeah, it gives us an opportunity to. Yeah, it gives us an opportunity to investigate the FOGO. That other trials are happening around the state and around the country. So
that's correct, and that's the intent of the short duration contract.
Yep. Questions to the General Manager or to Christy, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to move that motion, but we're still waiting on the recycling part of it from the MRF, aren't we, in Rockhampton, which is critical to what we're doing as well.
That's
I know
correct.
It's costing us a lot of money to send recycling away to either Mackay or Brisbane. So I know that's a part aside from the motion itself, but it's critical that we get that MRF up and running if we can, and there's still some insurance problems there, I think.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, for those watching online, the MRF burned down in Rockhampton. Yeah.
The MRF did burn down in Rockhampton, and the company is willing to bring it back up again, but it's boiled in some insurance problems at the moment.
Yeah, so currently our recyclables are predominantly being moved to Brisbane for processing. Currently our recyclables are being moved to Brisbane for processing.
Thank you.
Well, sometimes things like this actually gives us an opportunity to reassess some of the things that we do.
Yes.
So I think that's probably what we're trying to do and what Councillor Hanson is also talking about. But it'll be great too.
That's correct, and that's the focus of our operational plan item for this year.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we are moving ahead in the recommendations from our waste strategy. We're starting to move ahead now with a survey out there at the moment regarding what happens with FOGO in the area and what people would like us to do to it.
That's correct.
How I'd like to handle it.
Thank you. Moved Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor Cameron. Any further questions? I'll put the motion. All in favour, and it's carried. Thank you, John. The next item on the agenda is 4.2, which is Sports Marketing Australia Proprietary Limited, and they're a specialised supplier. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report seeks resolution to make use of local government regulations for exception for written quotes and tenders. We ask that Council resolve that Sports Marketing Australia Proprietary Limited is a specialised service. The SMA service is established specifically for regional Australia, intended to decentralise and attract sporting events to regional areas. The expected expenditure over a 3-year term is approximately $25,000. Open for questions.
Pretty straightforward, I think, councillors. No questions. Can I have a mover, please? Move Councillor Branthwaite, seconded Councillor Muscat. The motion, all in favour, carried. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Mr
Thank
Mayor.
you, Christy. Moving to G4.3, which is our monthly financial report for the period ending the 27th of October 2021. Hand over to our General Manager of Finance, Governance and Risk, Mark Holmes. Thank you, Mark.
Morning, Mayor. Morning, councillors. Just with respect to our monthly financial report, which is essentially for the end of the October month, so essentially a third of the way through the financial year. Starting to see the maturation of our end of our rate cycle and the rate collection process, and that's we've seen there within our net rates and utility charges, which has actually come down during the month. So that's due to the result of the last take-up of discount. And interestingly enough, our discount take-up was at a greater rate than it has been in previous years, and that's also then reflected when we go down to our outstanding rates and charges, where we see that being over almost 2.5% ahead of where we were at the same time last year. So 12.8% of our rates are outstanding, and we compare that to 15.2% at the same time last year. So in terms of a process perspective, that's obviously pleasing to see, and we'll obviously then look at continuing that process in terms of engaging with those that haven't been able to pay their rates at this point, and working through to make sure that we've got our instalment arrangements in place. And you can see some stats with respect to that. With respect to our interest income, you'll see that that's quite low, but that will start to pick up. And interestingly, we are starting to see some better returns on that. The markets are flagging and potential increase in interest rates. We are starting to see that come through in our term deposit rates, which have been quite abysmal, to be frank, but they are starting to creep up, which is good to see. From an expense perspective, our employee benefits remain essentially on track and in and around that essentially 33% of budget, and reflecting the pro rata position there. And our vacancy rate is around 7.5%. So we have got, essentially, we are marginally over our employee expenses at that space, and that's to do with some of the capitalisation at this point. Because if we would have been in line with what we budgeted, so we budgeted for a 6% vacancy rate, our experience is 7.5%, so I would expect that employee benefits figure to be slightly lower than that, but at the moment, still within our budget parameters at this point. Our capital spend, happy to report we've got essentially $31 million of our capital budget either spent or committed at this point, so which means we're around about 42% of the budget has been committed in that space. But happy to take questions with respect to the report.
Thanks, Mark. Questions, councillors? Councillor Branthwaite.
Sorry, I did have one. I was sort of thumbing through the monthly financial statement. It wasn't that one. It was the month end of October. No, it wasn't that one either. Sorry, just bear with me here. And we just made reference to the, there we go, the employee benefits, which is obviously salaries and wages and so forth. Last year we had a budget or a cost of $70 million, and now this year it's $4 million less. And I was sort of looking at it and going, oh, that's a pretty good saving. But in essence, you go down one more line, and then we've got contracts, consultants, is up that amount. So is it just a normal thing that we budget on like that?
So certainly, with respect to, we had it last year, our actual expenses were certainly higher in the first half of the year and into the early parts of 21 due to our vacancy rate being around 4%. So that means we were just spending a lot more. And it also depends on what works we're actually doing in terms of our CapEx. So if we're doing our works with our own crews, our own day labour, then that work will be essentially hitting our balance sheet and our capital works. And not hitting our OPEX. So sometimes the timing and the mix of our actual performance of work does impact that.
Yeah, there was a few further lines down. We've got other materials and services on this particular one, and previous it's been 4.8. Now we're up to 9.5 budget. Whether that actually happens or not, but what sort of things are included in that? People looking at this would say, well, what is included in that? But
essentially, it's our contractors. So again, probably depends on the type of work we're doing, but it's our contractors, our mowing contractors, our contractors, our day. We get truck hires, plant machinery, all that type of work goes through that other materials and services space.
All right. No, it sort of stuck out. I'm going, just might ask the question because a lot of people looking at this probably wouldn't know what those things actually meant as well. But it's a very good report, and I think the regional council purse is in very good hands. Thank you.
Councillor Goodluck.
Sorry, Mark, wouldn't the contractors be underlined by contractors and consultants?
It depends on classification, but it depends on type of work. So we do there's the consultants working up in that space, and there'll be some under the long-term contractors end up in that space. But depending on those, on the types of work, just depends on how that's been coded through.
And so that particular section Councillor Branthwaite was referring to, would that be a particular project body of works that is not long-term that you're saying?
It'll be an amalgamation of a lot of work across the business, not any one particular major in that space.
Lisa?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to add, it's something that we've been talking about, and we'd like to provide some better information for you, because some of the contractor arrangements we have are permanent arrangements, like the waste arrangement that we have now, that are services that others provide on our behalf. And I think it would be useful for council and community to see what percentage of that spend is that type of activity versus some other which might be seen as more optional, or where we don't have expertise or particular projects, to give a bit more visibility as to what constitutes that spend. So that's something we've been talking about as to how we might be able to provide that for you in a different way, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's a lot of our materials as well. You know, concrete pipes, our gravel, all that supporting material.
Yeah, it was just so it's quite significant, and it sort of,
Yep.
and it sort of stood out.
Yep.
And it drew my attention, that's all.
Councillor Muscat, and then Hanson.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Mark. I just didn't really want to ask you any questions, but I just wanted to probably use this space to encourage people in the public to contact us, or to, you know, it's actually quite interesting to go through some of these reports, and so for people to understand what is that we manage and what we do in council. So there's the same way as Councillor Braithwaite just asked a few questions, and I think it will be worth it for a lot of people around our region to read some of this information. And obviously they will have questions, because there's you know, there's just financial statements. There's not a detailed description of what every single bill that we pay. But this, what you show us here is actually huge in relation to what we do. And I would love for people to better understand where the rates go and how we manage this region, because there's a lot of work that goes here, and it's not, you know, our work is not just going to morning teas and art galleries. So it's mainly this what we do. I like to move the report, but I know Councillor Hanson has a question.
And I have Councillor O'Grady as well. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll take the mover and Councillor Muscat, and second at Councillor O'Grady, but I'll throw it back to Councillor Hanson for his question.
Through the Mayor, just a quick question on capital spend. Are you a little bit concerned that we've only actually spent 22% of, I know that we've got commitments, we've always said we've got commitments of $15 million, which brings it up to around about the 30-something%, which is a third through the year. But just looking at that, it's a little concerning to me that we're not sort of moving there. Are you concerned about that?
I think what isn't presented, I guess, is how we tracked last year. I guess our rate, essentially, what's in that spend curve, our S curve, is very much in line with where we tracked last year, and saw us hitting a very similar amount. Probably the greater risk, and this year is obviously heading into a wetter period. So there may be some risk with our capital portfolio if we do have an extended wet weather period, but that's something we're just to manage as we work through.
I just said it was fairly ambitious, that's all. The target was fairly ambitious.
As part of that, we do remember we've got, from a budgeting perspective, you've allowed $5 million from a reactive perspective. So if we do have to have that emergent spend, and that's included within that $72 million figure.
Thank you, Mark, for reminding me of that. Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Good luck.
Thanks, Mark. Just in relation to the spend curve, why don't we report it? I note that the line on the graph there, it's certainly not straight, so I'm not sure if you just drew that freehand, but or where that line came from. But in relation to the spend curve, the standard practice in capital spend for any organisation is flat after the budget's adopted, and then a steep incline. And as you mentioned, we take into account wet weather potential cyclones, all those sorts of things which can impact the ability for us to get that work done. And we constantly have challenges in explaining that to certain other organisations that we work with. Why don't we report it and present it as it happens? Can you draw a curved line instead of a squiggly straight one there?
And that, I guess, so that graph and that very, very poor drawing by myself, that isn't necessarily a drawing. It is actually coming from our data, and it is coming from our works planning and scheduling team, who do go through and monitor the spend and the projected spends on all of our projects. There has been a more considered effort to make sure that we've actually tried to flatten out that curve, so to speak, so it doesn't stay as flat for as long. And that certainly has been a key to making sure we've got that rolling program of works, and we've got the work rolling over from one financial year to another, so that therefore you're not essentially having that essentially really flat piece and then that big incline. And I think that's reflected in that growth there, but I'm sure John can expand more on that.
And that's all right, if I can. And I know we've been doing that work, and absolutely that's important work. Do you anticipate that we might reach the point at some point, 2 to 3 years' time, where we will actually start to hit those projected spends throughout the first and second quarters of the financial year, rather than because I've never seen it as long as I've been here, and that's why I asked the question, why not report it as we see it? Or is that's our aspirational targets? Is that what we're saying?
That's a forecast spend based on the data that we have. So as we get better at the rolling program, we'll actually have more confidence in the forecast expenditure, and hopefully you see that S-curve be more of an S, because that's the characteristic of a true forecasting model is. We got through last year. We understand our program better. A considerable amount of projects in this year's spend are already under that construction or heading to that construction phase, and that's what that graph represents.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? No. I have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Muscat. Councillor O'Grady, I put the motion all in favour. It's carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is councillor reports. Do we have any written councillor reports? Is there any verbal councillor reports? No? Well, I would just like to mention on the front page of today's Courier Mail, I encourage locals to have a read, if not online. Certainly go to your local news agency and buy a copy, and you'll see our very own Councillor Muscat on the front page challenging the independent assessor on her ability to be able to block people who constantly defame her, who are spiteful and nasty online and social media, and it's not acceptable. And I would like to congratulate Councillor Muscat for challenging the Office of the Independent Assessor, and you have every right to block people on social media when they behave in this sort of atrocious way. It's disgraceful, and I don't accept it in our local community. Social media gives a platform for everyone to have a say, but be genuine in what you have to say, be polite in how you host yourself. Councillor, and I've had comments from people right across the state of Queensland messaging me all morning saying, well done for you for standing up. The Office of the Independent Assessor is out of line, but obviously I understand, I'm hoping they've dismissed this, which they absolutely should. Vocal minorities who don't get their own way or are not happy with an outcome, to then attack people online and be as nasty and vicious as they have been, is not acceptable. And well done to you. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I was, and I know I'm not the only one, so we live this every day. And I actually, I have children that follow some of these things, and I don't want them to be uncomfortable or scared because their mother is being tagged and harassed, or some of the comments that I receive are actually quite disgusting, and no one should be having to listen to them or read them, and there's nothing I can do to stop them, and the only thing I can do is block people so I don't have to read them or it doesn't come up on someone else's feed. So there's a million ways in which I connect with community. So I haven't stopped anyone from contacting me. I have email, I have text, I have WhatsApp, I have Messenger, I have LinkedIn, I have, what else? Twitter, I have Instagram, and I even had a TikTok account for a while. So for someone to say that I'm stopping someone from engaging meaningfully with them is just outrageous. So thank you.
And they can write a letter to you too, can't they?
That's right. I also can read and write. So.
Well, thank you, Councillor. The next item on the agenda is urgent business. There's no urgent business, there's no notice of motion, and there's no confidential items. I'll declare the meeting closed at 10:17 a.m. and thank you for your attendance.